you get what you pay for. Now, one time I heard a guy bragging, he was bragging, about having bought a car for only a few $100s. The thing is a couple months later, he didn't have that car anymore. Because he only spent a few $100s, but that's about all it was worth. It lasted him about 2 months. And it was no longer running. The thing is bargains don't always turn out to be bargains. Sometimes you're just buying junk. And, but you get what you pay for. Now, the other thing is sometimes you just buy something and you find out it's not exactly what you expected it to be. Or maybe you thought it was going to have certain features and you find out it doesn't. Maybe because you read the box and you find out later, you look back at the box and you say, oh, the wording was misleading. Or something. But you buy something thinking it's going to do this and it doesn't. And, but the thing is once we've bought it, we've bought it. And once you've made that choice, you then have to live with your decisions. Live with your choices. And, sometimes that can be a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. But in our passage today, as we look in the book of Judges, there are going to be some choices that are made. But the choices are all made for selfish reasons. And when they make these choices, there's no thought given to God at all. Whether they even thought to consider God, I don't even think. But there's just no consideration, no thought given to God at all. No thought given to whether or not this was right or wrong. They're just simply doing it because it's what they want to do. And I did say you get what you paid for, right? Well, as we look in our passage today, we're going to find out the men of Shechem are literally going to pay Abimelech to be their king. And they're going to get what they paid for. But it was a bad idea. And then they have to live with their decision. So this morning we're going to look at the story of Abimelech. And we're going to go all the way through it. Then we're going to talk about some lessons that we can learn from the mess that he made. And so we're beginning in chapter 8, verses 33 to 35. Chapter 8, verse 33 says, "And as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal," that is Gideon, "in return for all the good that he had done to Israel." Now, we know already from reading the story of Gideon at the end, we know that there was some idolatry going on even during the time of Gideon's life. Because we were told last week that they whored after the ephod that Gideon had made. But here we find out that as soon as Gideon dies, Israel again turns fully into worshiping idols. In fact, worshiping Baal. And we're told here that they whored after the Baal, meaning that it was an illegitimate thing. They were being unfaithful to God. This was infidelity. And it's like as if they're going after a prostitute. And this is the picture. God uses this word on purpose because he's wanting you to grasp how terrible this is. That they left their God and went after another God, a false God. But we're also told that they made Baal-berith their god. Now the interesting thing is the name Baal-berith means Baal of the covenant. And so it seems to suggest that the people have now broken their covenant with God, with Yahweh, and have made a covenant with Baal, the false Canaanite god. So at this point, they've either forgotten God or just completely ignored all that he has done for them. They've forgotten about or completely ignored all the good things that he's done for them. And we're specifically told here that he rescued them from all their enemies on every side. And so God has been protecting them. He sent deliverers like Gideon and others to help them. But now they've ignored all that. But not only have they been unfaithful to God, we're also told here that they were unfaithful to Gideon as well, or unfaithful to his family. In other words, they didn't treat them well. They've been disloyal to his family, and even though Gideon had done good things for them. So here they're not only ignoring God, but they're ignoring all the good that Gideon had done for Israel. In fact, those words are right in there. All the good that he had done for Israel. Now let's stop there for a second, because last week we talked about Gideon. And if you remember, there was a lot of negative that we talked about Gideon there last week. But there was also some good. I mean, here he says they forgot the good that Gideon did. Was there good? Yes, there was good that Gideon did. Because we remember when Gideon went out in faith and he conquered the enemies, the Midianite enemy, and delivered the people of Israel from the Midianites. There was good that Gideon did. So when we look at Gideon, really, we see a very mixed bag. There's both good and bad, obedience and disobedience, faithfulness and unfaithfulness. And I think that when we look at Gideon's life, it's a great reminder for us. Because not only that, Gideon is listed in Hebrews chapter 11, in the Hall of Faith, the faith chapter of Hebrews, where it talks about different people who live by faith. Gideon is mentioned. His name is mentioned there in that list. So when we see this, again, I think this is a great reminder to us that, we are all imperfect people, but God uses imperfect people. Well, let's keep reading in chapter 9, verse 1. It says, Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our brother. Now, if you remember last week, Gideon refused the request when the people they came to him and said, Be our king. And Gideon said, No, I'm not going to be your king. Only the Lord is your king. But then what did Gideon do? He went on to act like a king and did a bunch of things that were very king-like. And so now Gideon dies. And his death then would leave a little bit of a void in leadership, because he's been kind of leading the people here for these years. Not only that, when he was acting like a king, one of the things he did is he took many wives and he had 70 sons. Now, you might expect that with those 70 sons, if Gideon's been leading, that one of those 70 sons or all of them might then step up and want to take some leadership in Israel. And that's the question. Would one of them or would all of them? Well, we know that at least one had great aspirations. Abimelech decides that he wants to be king. Now catch that. He doesn't just want to lead Israel, he wants to be king. So even though his father said, No, I'm not king, but then acted like it, Abimelech wants to take it a step further, and he wants to actually be king. And so maybe his name went to his head. Remember, his name means my father is king. And maybe he thinks, well, if my dad is going to be the unofficial king, maybe I should take it a step further and be the official king. And so he goes to Shechem and he says, I want to be your king. Why did he go to Shechem? Because they're his relatives. They're the people who are raised on his mom's side. And so he goes to them and he suggests to them that they would be better off if they just had one man ruling over them than 70. Just me rather than all of Gideon's sons. And he thinks about that. You could have 70 different men leading you. But he says, but you know what? None of them would have the same care and concern and interest for you, for Shechem, than I would, because I'm related to you. Well, the leaders, they get there together and they talk about it, and they're like, yeah, that makes good sense. I agree. Okay. And so they agree together, let's make Abimelech our king, because they think he'll be good to us. And so they put their backing behind Abimelech. Now notice what's happening here. There's a whole bunch of selfishness. Abimelech, he wants to be king. He wants to have the power, the prestige. He wants to be king. Why? Because he wants to be king. Not for the good of others, but he just wants to be king. And then you have these leaders in Shechem. Why do they want to make Abimelech their king? Because they think they might benefit from it. Because, hey, if the king is our relative, then maybe he'll treat us well. Maybe we'll get something out of it. So let's keep reading then in verse 4 through 6. He says, and they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went to his father's house at Orpha and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Milo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. Okay, so Abimelech, he's not just making a power grab and saying, okay, I want to be in control. But he's going to take out all the competition. Everyone who might kind of come and make a claim to what he thinks is his throne, he's just going to take them all out. He's just going to kill them all. So no one can challenge his rule. So the people of Shechem, they give him money so he can hire some mercenaries. Some people who just go fight for money. And we're told here they're described as worthless and reckless. In other words, these are not men of character. These are men who will do just whatever they need to do as long as they're paid. And so he goes and hires these guys, and they follow him. And they go and they kill all of his brothers except for one. And we're told here that they kill them in a mass execution in one place. This says on one stone. So they gather them all up and they kill them all. Except for one, Jotham, who managed to hide from them and then escape. Now notice the nearsightedness of these leaders of Shechem. Why would they choose Abimelech to be king? You notice he has no men following him. He has no one following him. They have to pay him to hire some men to follow him. Is he qualified to be king, to be a leader? Right now he has no one following him. And apparently he can't get him on his own, so they have to pay him in order to do it. He's not qualified to be king. The second thing, if someone is so power hungry as Abimelech is here, if someone is so power hungry enough to kill his 70 brothers, half brothers, what makes the people of Shechem think that he will be good to them just because they're his relatives? There is no guarantee of this. Well, but they make him king. And they do it there in Shechem. And we're told next to the oak of the pillar. Now, this is interesting because the oak of the pillar, a lot of times trees were associated with worship in those days. But here we have the pillar. The pillar refers to a large stone that would be set up for Baal worship. And so they make him king in a place of worship of a false god, the site of the false god. Now this is very ironic. If you remember, as we've studied through Genesis and Exodus and on up to this through Joshua, you'll remember a few things that happened at Shechem. Let me tell you what happened at Shechem. When Jacob had left the land, when he ran away from Esau and left the land and he decided to come back after 14 years with Laban, he came back with his family with his family, and he came into the land. He stopped there at Shechem, and in Shechem he took all of the family's idols and buried them under a tree in Shechem. In other words, he did this as an act of faithfulness or commitment to God, saying we're not going to serve false gods. We're not going to worship these idols. We're going to worship the one true God. And so they took and they buried them all there at Shechem. So Shechem was a place of commitment to God. Second thing that happened here, Joseph's bones were brought back from Egypt and buried there at Shechem. Why? Because Joseph asked the people, his brothers and the people, to bring his bones back to God's promised land. In doing so, he was showing his faith. He believed that God was going to do what he promised them, that he was going to give them that land, that they, even though they were in Egypt at that time, that he would take them out and bring them back to the land. And in an act of faith, he says, take my bones and bury them in God's land when you go home. The third thing that happened is Joshua, just before his death, gathered all the people of Israel together at Shechem. And he challenged them. And they renewed the covenant. This is the time when Joshua said, choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the people said, oh, we will too. And so again, it was a time where they renewed the covenant and they made a commitment to God that we won't serve idols, but we will serve God. And Joshua set up a stone as a reminder to the people of the commitment, the covenant that they had just made. And it was supposed to stay in there forever as a reminder. But now there is a place for worshiping idols there in Shechem. So this place that had been traditionally associated with faithfulness to God and commitment to God, at this place now they have made a murderer, someone who murdered his 70 brothers. They've made him king in association with a false god. Let's keep reading the story of Abimelech. Verse 7. When it was told to Jotham that he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and cried aloud and said to them, listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my abundance by which gods and men are honored and go hold sway over the trees? And the tree said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go hold sway over the trees? And the tree said to the vine, you come reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men and go hold sway over the trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So Jotham, who had survived by hiding, he now comes because he heard about Abimelech being made king. And so he goes to the mountain and he goes up to make a statement to everyone who is involved in it. And so he stands on the mountain where he can be heard by everyone and where he can make a quick escape. And so not too close, but close enough. All right? So he goes and he calls out to them and he tells them a story. It's really an allegory. It's a story that has meaning to it. And he's making a point to them. But in this story, the story is about trees who are looking for a king. And the trees go out, and the trees represent the people of Shechem and Israel in general. But the trees go out and they ask different trees to be their king. And so they ask 2 trees who are producing fruit, and then they go to a vine who are also producing fruit. So these are 3 trees or plants that are productive, that are doing good things, that they're fulfilling their purpose in producing fruit. And these would represent qualified people to be kings, people who are qualified to be king. Well, so then those 3 all say no. Why? Because that's not their purpose. They're already doing their thing. They're already fulfilling the purpose. They're already producing good things. So it's like, why should we go and just like sway in the wind over the other trees? And so we've already got our good that we are doing. And it wouldn't make sense for us to stop just to hold some lofty position over the trees. So then they go to the thorn bush. Now, it might strike you as a little odd going from mighty or good productive trees to a thorn bush, because what does a thorn bush produce? Thorns. In other words, nothing good. But they go to the thorn bush and they ask the thorn bush to be their king. Now, the thorn bush obviously represents Abimelech, and he is obviously unqualified to be king because he does no good. He doesn't produce anything. But when they go to him, he says, okay, if you're going to make me king, then I'll take care of you. He offers them security in his shade. Well, think about that. How much shade does a thorn bush make? Not much. It doesn't produce a whole lot. So there's just irony in his story here. He's like, so he says, I'll give you shade, or I'll give you security in my shade. But he really doesn't have anything to offer them. At this point, you think the thorn bush might think that he's an oak. He's just a thorn bush, but he thinks he's an oak. And so he says, hey, I'll do this for you. But he also warns them, if you're not really in good faith making me your king, then may fire come out from the thorn bush and consume you, burn you, and destroy you. Now his point is clear. Jotham's point here is clear when he tells the story. Abimelech had no real power. He had no real authority. He had no real ability to protect the people. He's totally unqualified to be king. But they made him king anyways. The funny thing is, all Abimelech had was an ego and a thirst for power. And Jotham, in telling this story, is also telling the people of Shechem that they did something really dumb. Just bluntly as that, you did something really dumb. But he uses this image to tell them this and to show them this picture, to explain how Abimelech is not really qualified and that they didn't do something very smart. And he's going to continue, and he's going to actually directly confront them now for what they did. Look at verse 16 through 21. It says, "Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, and if you dealt with Jerubbaal," that's Gideon, "and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If you then have acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech and let him also rejoice in you." In other words, let everything go well. Verse 20, "But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the leaders of Shechem and Beth Milo. And let fire come out from the leaders of Shechem and from Beth Milo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled and went to Beer and lived there because of Abimelech his brother." So he continues on. And he says, so if you acted correctly towards my dad, towards Gideon and the family of Gideon, in other words, if you are doing good to him in return for all the good that he did for you, then that's great. You deserve to be blessed. But he says, if not, and by the way, you're obviously not, because you just killed his 70 sons. If you're not treating him the way you should have, the way he deserves to be treated by you, then may you get the consequences of your treachery. And when Jotham is saying this, he's actually praying that this will happen, that they will get what they deserve. He's calling a curse down upon them if they have done the wrong that they have done. But he's praying that they will get what they deserve, and that they will find themselves at odds with each other and destroy each other. And then Jotham runs away. The thing that we're going to find now as we continue reading is that God actually does what Jotham asks. They get justice. They get what they deserve. Keep reading verse 22. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. And the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hand to kill his brothers. And so here it is. It doesn't take long before there's problems. Now, this would make sense just simply from the fact of the way it started. The way this relationship started was not a very good foundation. I mean, deceit, treachery, murder. And so you would expect that with this sinful beginning that it might not last long. However, we know that it's not going to last long because God clearly steps in and gets involved personally here. Because he sends the Spirit to go and to cause the relationship to break down between them. And what God's doing is he's starting to work and to bring justice in their lives because of the murders that they had committed. Verse 25. And the leaders of Shechem put men in ambush against him on the mountaintops. And they robbed all who passed by along the way. And it was told to Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, moved into Shechem with his relatives. And the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. And they went out into the field and gathered the grapes from their vineyards and trod them and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and reviled Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who are we of Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor," that's the ancestors of the people of Shechem. "Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him, Abimelech? Would that this people were under my hand, then I would remove Abimelech. I would say to Abimelech, increase your army and come out." So here's the leaders of Shechem. They've turned against Abimelech. They've decided they don't like following him anymore. They don't like him. And so they turned against him, and they start attacking the trade routes. Now, by attacking the trade routes, they're probably costing Abimelech money, causing him financial loss. But they're also saying, they're kind of challenging him, saying, if you're king, you've got to take care of your people. And so by attacking the trade routes, Abimelech now has to go and fix the problem. If he's king, he needs to take care of it and protect his people. And so they start doing this, and the problems start between them. And at this point, we're introduced to a guy named Gaal. And he's new to Shechem, but the leaders like him, and we're told that they put their confidence in him. In other words, they put their trust in him. They trust in him to protect them. From who? From Abimelech. From who? Their king. Okay, so now they need another guy to protect them from their king because they're causing problems for their king. This whole thing's a mess. Apparently, they didn't think things through when they made Abimelech king. So it's harvest time, so they go out and they gather the grapes from their vineyards and they make wine, and then they have a festival. Basically, they start drinking, they're having a party in front of their false god, or in the presence of their false god. And when they start drinking, they get brave. And they start talking about Abimelech. And they start talking bad about him, like, oh, we don't like him. Well, I don't know what all they're saying about him, but they're talking bad about him. But then Gaal speaks up, and he gets really cocky. Because he basically says, if you made me leader, I'd take care of Abimelech. I'd get rid of him. And he basically says, I would challenge him and say, come on, bring on your army. Let's read what happens. Verse 30. It says, when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words. Zebul was a governor under Abimelech. When he heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives had come to Shechem, and they are stirring up the city against you. Now, therefore, go by night, you and the people who are with you, and set an ambush in the fields. And so he hears what's happening, and he says, this is what you need to do. He lets Abimelech know he's not going to let this go because he's loyal to Abimelech. And so he gives him this message, says, this is what you need to do. Come by night and set an ambush in the field. So then, verse 33, then in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may do them as your hand finds to do. In other words, so when they come out, attack them and do whatever you want. Verse 34, so Abimelech and all the men who were with him rose up by night and set an ambush against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the gate of the city. And Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from the ambush. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the mountaintops. And Zebul said to him, you mistake the shadows of the mountains for men. So he's like, no, when Gaal goes out there, he sees people in the morning. He's like, it's probably, maybe dusk or something, and he can't tell for sure what's happening. But he says, look, there's people coming. He doesn't know what they are, but there's people coming. And Zebul goes, nah, you're seeing things. He's buying time. So Abimelech and his army can get closer to the city. Verse 37, Gaal spoke again and said, look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one company coming from the direction of the diviner's oak. Then Zebul said to him, where is your mouth now, you who said, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out now and fight with them. So he basically says, where's your big talk now? You think you're so bad? You think you're so good? You're so strong? Prove it. Go out and fight them. And Gaal went out, verse 39, and Gaal went out at the head of the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And Abimelech lived at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not dwell at Shechem. So when they attack, when Abimelech attacks the people of Shechem, they start running back to the city, because the city is where they can be protected, inside the walls. And so many of them die on the way, but some of them get there and they hide in the city. And at that time, Abimelech goes home, because he can't get into the city, so he just goes home. But Zebul is still there living in Shechem, and he kicks Gaal and his family out. He doesn't let them stay in Shechem. He says, you have to leave. And so he forces them to leave. Well, look what happens the next day, verse 42. On the following day, the people went out into the field, and Abimelech was told. And he took his people and divided them into 3 companies and set an ambush in the fields. And he looked and saw the people coming out of the city. So he rose against them and killed them. Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, while 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the field and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He captured the city and killed the people who were in it, and he razed the city and sowed it with salt. So the next day, the people of Shechem, they think it's done. He said, Abimelech already came. He fought with them. Gaal is gone. It's over. And so they go outside of the protection of their city walls, and they start working in the fields. Well, Abimelech finds out they're going outside, and so he attacks them again. But this time, he sets up 1 company at the gate of the city, so they can't run back in. And so they kill everyone who's in the field. Then he turns and goes in and kills everyone who's in the city. He destroys the city. And then it says he sowed salt. In other words, he took salt and filled their fields with salt so that it's infertile, so they can't grow plants there anymore, grow crops there anymore. Well, let's keep reading them in verse 46. It says, when all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of it, they entered the stronghold of the house of El-Berith. That's a false god. Abimelech was told that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. And Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwood and took it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, what you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have done. So every one of the people cut down his bundle, and following Abimelech, put it against the stronghold. And they set the stronghold on fire over them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. And so Abimelech, when the leaders hear what Abimelech has done, that he's attacked the city, they all go and hide in a stronghold. But Abimelech's not going to just let them stay there. So he goes and he gathers up firewood and has everyone else do it too. They come and they put the firewood down around the stronghold and they set it all on fire. And he kills all the people inside of the stronghold. Now notice the demise of these leaders. Does it sound familiar? It reflects exactly Jotham's words. May fire come out from the bramble or from the thorn bush and devour the cedars. Abimelech, the thorn bush, has just set fire and destroyed the cedars, the leaders of Shechem, with fire. Let's keep reading verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebes and encamped against Thebes and captured it. And there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women and all the leaders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in. And they went up to the roof of the tower, and Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, everyone departed to his home. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return to their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So apparently Thebes was in league with the people of Shechem somehow. And so he goes and he attacks Thebes as well. And it's a very similar story. He goes there, the people hide in a tower or in a stronghold, and he goes to burn it. But this time something different happens. When he gets there close enough to set it on fire, a woman takes a stone and throws it down on him and crushes his head. But of course Abimelech, he's more concerned about being humiliated by the fact of being remembered as being killed by a woman than dying. Because he says to his armor bearer, his soldier with him, he says, "Take your sword and kill me." So they don't talk about that. He's still getting talked about, right? He doesn't want to be humiliated in his death. Kind of still was. But anyways, so he dies and everyone goes home. But what we see here again, and it says clearly that God brought justice. He brought it to Abimelech and to the people of Shechem. They got what they deserved for the murder of Gideon's sons. So, but after this story, this is a terrible story. There's not a whole lot of good in the story. But after the chaos of this time of Abimelech, after all the destruction and all this dangerous time, there's a little bit of order restored. And we see this in the first 5 verses of chapter 10. It says, "After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamar in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamar. After him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years, and he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Kamon." And so we see here that things seem to be a little better. You got a couple of judges who are leading, and things seem to be going okay. But you'll notice a couple things that give us a hint that things are still not quite right. In all of the things we've read up to this time, when it talks about a judge and it says, "And he lived for so long," and what did do? God gave the land rest. No statement about rest here in these verses. The other thing we see is it seems that Jair is following in Gideon's footsteps in acting like a king. It says he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. Now, to have 30 sons, that suggests he had more than one wife, probably several. They all rode on donkeys, which is something that princes would do. And they had their own cities. It seems that he's acting like a king, much like Gideon did. Gideon set a wrong precedent. And now it seems that someone else is following in his footsteps. Someone else says, "Well, if Gideon's going to do it, I should do it too." The thing is, like I said, this is definitely not a feel-good story. There's not a whole lot of positive. It's mostly negative. But there are some lessons that we can learn from it, from Abimelech's mess. And the first lesson is actually one of the positive things that we find in this passage. The first lesson that we can learn from the story is that God is in control. God is sovereign. God is king. He's the king. Not Abimelech, not someone else. God is king. He's in control. And he brings about justice. And so whether people recognize that God is in control or not, he is. Whether people want God to be king or not, he is. Because we saw here in this passage that he easily came and he changed the relationship between the people of Shechem and Abimelech. He changed their feelings and caused problems between them in order to bring justice and in order to answer the prayer of Jotham. So God can step into any situation and change it. And he can step into any situation and bring justice. God is in control. The second lesson that we see in these verses is that God sometimes lets us get what we deserve. We could call that justice, but sometimes he gives us or he lets us get what we deserve. In a very practical way, we could think about this. The people of Shechem, they picked their king. They got what they deserved. I was thinking about this because we have elections. We pick our president every 4 years, and sometimes we get what we deserve. I'm not making any comments. I'm just observing. But sometimes God lets us get what we deserve. But when we pick who we're going to follow, not just presidents or kings, but who we follow, whose advice, the people around us, or what, when we pick who we're going to follow, then we're stuck with our choices and the consequences of our choices. And if we sin, then we suffer the consequences. Sure, sometimes God will rescue us, but often we suffer the consequences of our sin. When we're unfaithful to God, we fall into the traps of our choices. But God's ultimate purpose in letting us get what we deserve is to bring us back to Himself, to discipline us so that we might turn to Him and say, God, I blew it, I need you. The third lesson is that sinful precedents can lead to chaos. We saw this, major issues develop in the life of Abimelech. Gideon set the precedents. He said, I'm not king, but he acted like it. Then his son came along and said, well, I want to do more than act like it. I want to be king. And what happened? A whole lot of people ended up dead. Sinful precedents can lead to chaos. But here's the thing we need to think about. Two things. One is that you never know who your actions will impact. You don't know who is looking at you and who is following you. You don't know who will follow the precedents that you set, or do like Abimelech and take it even further. So if you are sinning or you are living in a way that is unfaithful to God, someone may be watching you and decide that that's okay because you did it. And then follow into your sinful ways. On the other hand, just because someone else is doing something they shouldn't doesn't mean that we should. Now this sounds so simple, because this is something we say to our kids, right? Just because everyone else is jumping off a cliff, would you? And it seems so simple. And yet, we tend to do it. People tend to follow. Growing up in youth group, you have maybe a kid jokingly says something one time and it gets a laugh. Then they say it again. Next thing you know, after time, the whole group is doing it and it's become okay. But it's not. Because it's not really, sure, maybe it was just a little off color. But it's not. It's sin. It's not okay. It's being unfaithful to God. The fourth lesson is that sinful selfishness can lead to really bad choices and consequences. We see this in Abimelech and in the men of Shechem. Both just doing their things, making their choices because of what they want for themselves. No consideration of God, no consideration of what's good for everyone else. They just want what they want. The thing is, if all we do is think about ourselves, then we can be pretty nearsighted in our decisions. And if all we do is think about ourselves, then we may end up making some sinful choices as well. At the very least, when you go to make choices, when you are making decisions about how you're going to live, about what you're going to do, about whatever it is, when you go to make choices, at the very least, consider the King. And by this I mean Jesus. What would Jesus want you to do? What would bring honor and glory to His name? But all in all, like I said when we started, you get what you pay for. You make choices, then you have to live with them. And sometimes God in His mercy will rescue you from the consequences of a bad choice. But oftentimes we have to deal with those consequences. But the thing is if we turn to God, if we say, God, I know I messed up, but if we turn to Him and look to Him for help, then He will be with us and He will help us through the situation, get through those consequences. And so what is the wise way to live? Because obviously Abimelech didn't have it. And the people of Shechem, they didn't have it. What is the wise way to live? Well, you need to recognize that God is in control. Recognize that He rules. Recognize that His ways are the best ways. And then obey Him. Be faithful to Him. And if you obey Him and you are faithful to Him, then you will be spared the consequences of sinful, bad choices and selfish decisions.